Chapter 1. The Dream of an Horse. Although his sister Bjork didn't kill anyone 4 long years ago to the day, Bjorn Lefty Armwell took the fall for robbery murder. She was a smart little filly, and she knew the track. Lefty had recently been transferred from Wakefield to Millbank Prison. He did indeed look guilty on account of the job war said to be done by a one-armed man, and Bjorn had lost one of his hands as a lad in a terrible hunting accident amongst the birch trees with his sister. For his unproved crimes, he was sentenced to a total of 20 years. In Millbank Prison, there was, apart from everything else one would think to find in a prison, an horse, chestnut brown and black, who was the first thing of particular interest to Lefty. For Lefty saw in the horse's eye the same flash of freedom burning in his own. He asked one of his brother convicts what the horse's name was. "London Jack," said brother convict. "Thar's to name what they give me." "Aye, Lefty, looks like a Londoner." Lefty couldn't just stand there while an horse war in captivity. It was as bad as if there were a unicorn in the prisoner yard. In his bunk, he began to devise a plan for getting London Jack back to London or wherever he was from. And though his logic was the logic of an horse, which is the logic of a dream, he acted to that end. A few days later, Lefty approached a guard. "Sir, Lefty, may I ask you something?" "Go ahead," the guard said with annoyance. "May I speak with the horse, sir?" Lefty. "You what?" Guard. "Well, see, we had one when I was a lad, and I was a good lad, only recently fell into hard times." "You're in here to be punished, guard." "True enough, sir, Lefty, but only for a time. But as time is, and like the great whales of the sea, we must come up for air, sir." "Aye, go ahead, guard, for a minute, and don't touch it. If it moves from you, just get back to your work. Don't need you disturbing any of the decent animals. You just mind the pigs." "Oh, I will, sir, I will, Lefty." He walked over to the horse and told him how he had a plan to escape. "You ain't claustrophobic, are you?" "It's a small job, even for a man." London Jack subtly shook his head no. "Good. Well, say no more, Lefty. I shall call upon you by and by." But by and by is more easily said. Lefty was initially given a good job in the library because of his background as a teacher of mathematics, but that did not suit his ends. His was not to bide his time, his was to break free, and so he but bent and broke a few rules, nothing malicious, just small contraband infractions, walking out of turn, talking out of line, small enough altercations so that the guards would only hold it jokingly against him and remind him he does not have this cachet to afford all the rights he took for granted on the outside. This went until the point what others took as precaution he took as ambition. The warden was wont to have an entire pack of biscuit custard creams with his daily coffee. The guards set up Lefty with a sort of last chance. But the coffee decanter came without the coffee and the dish without the creams. Lefty was dragged out of the warden's water closet, spitting biscuit crumbs out in protest of his innocence. "Get your hands off me," he protested. "I only got one arm to defend myself." The guards left him alone for 4 days and came back after he had exhausted himself, sleeping for 20 minutes at a time on the concrete floor. His whole body ached. "I'm just a man, and all men are sinners, I suppose," was Lefty's only remark when they broke him down in interrogation. Throughout, Lefty had taken far too much of their time, using objections to defend his pride rather than his innocence. But the warden didn't take any leniency with the prescribed punishments. He lost his trustee job and was sent with boots on to the farm. They made him shovel behind the pigs, but he was now close enough to the horse to let him know what he was thinking. In the abiding time, he had found his first plan of escape through a charmless old git named Wall-Eyed Fred. According to Wall-Eyed Fred, the whole inside of the prison was hollow. It looked like a postmodern brutalist fortress, but it was really like a myriad of cardboard boxes placed together. The entrance points were simple, but they were all on the guard side. Their locker rooms had the maintenance entrance for accessing behind the pipes. Lefty thought if he was going to get caught trying to escape, it might be helpful to have the horse. If indeed he was caught, he would just plead insanity, saying, "I wanted the horse to have a safe shower. The Lord alone knows what would happen to a horse in the prisoner's shower." It was a solution, but really it was just a possible move. As in chess, it is a mistake to make a move simply because it has valid points. One must press the reality of the moment and see if there is a better move. Pressing so hard in one's mind as to bend time. The only other thing that came to mind was literally a brick wall. In one of the passages from the library, there is an old doorway that has been sealed up with bricks. It's an old delivery close. He had dismissed it. How long would it take to knock down? Would it immediately cause an alarm? Where did it lead? The sewers led to the river. The sewers were safe, apart from the woolly rats. There might be bars or something, but he would have some metal of his own. But then he thought, well, a 9-pound hammer is as easily bargained for as a crowbar. It just costs more cigarettes. For days and days, he started manifesting the plan of knocking down the brick wall. Like a boxer going for the heavyweight championship, all he could see was bricks and tearing them down. Then shortly after March, Lefty had to report to the guards that the pig crap was not looking as good as it used to. Not that it ever looked great, but it was much worse than before. Something foul had gotten into them. "Did you poison these pigs, Lefty?" Guard: "Absolutely impossible, sir. We eat from the same trough." The veterinarian came down and said the pigs had a certain type of swine flu, not fit to be eaten, and the only thing to do was dispose of them. This was most unfortunate, since the only reason they had a few pigs was to slaughter them for Easter ham. "What'll we do for Easter this year, sir?" Lefty asked. "We'll do what we did 12 years ago. when the same thing happened, guard. What was that, sir? We ate the horse, the guard said, laughing. The prisoners, that is. That gave Lefty a deadline. He had to get the horse out of there. He thought about God working through him. That flash in yard between their eyes was God. Although he was no longer a religious man, he still prayed from time to time. During the sleeplessness of that night, he muttered a prayer. God, I know you're using me to save this horse, Lefty. I don't know what great plans you have for him, but if you would only see clear to helping me, I'll get him out. On that fateful day, Holy Thursday night, through the sewers they ran, but Lefty and London Jack were almost immediately caught. London Jack had a rope tied around his neck like an umbilical cord. Lefty locked to a rail, but the guard only locked his prosthetic hand to the rail, and Lefty saw his opportunity. He chewed off his wooden hand at the wrist. Then, after Lefty undid his rope, London Jack and him ran. Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great Euphrates, it says in the book of Revelations, Lefty said, driving the rudder with his homemade hook, and the heads of the horses were as lions. The lock keepers, the towns, the stretch of canals. London Jack looked at them all with his handsome face and soft, beautiful eyes. Under each bridge there'd be some birds, and London Jack would watch them flutter their wings. Each lock keeper got the same from Lefty. Hi, just a load of pigs. Well, there's no toll on pigs, the lock keeper would say. Pig iron, that is, good sir. Iron pigs, as it were, sir, Lefty would say and laugh. But it was more than pig iron. They were secretly transferring church bells, so they were not dismantled by the government. The current prime minister had all but outlawed the use of church bells and declared the government could confiscate them at will. A few brave churches rang their bells in defiance, but they were seized upon and damaged. Some of them were cemented up and later fell through the belfry. Most churches began to leave them silent, but still they could be subject to being turned over by the authorities, to the authorities. The safe thing was to smuggle them to the islands for now. For their troubles, they were promised a ticket to Canada. Remember those woolly rats, London Jack? Thought we'd never dig our way out before they got us. Slowed us down mightily, but God was there digging with us, and don't deny it. We couldn't have moved that much earth. Just a man and an horse. One door to freedom, and it's covered to the pecker in dirt and mud, and I don't want to know what else. But behind it was the beautiful sewer of freedom. London Jack's large, soft eyes lazily watched the waters. His large brown muscles brought the barge down the road. He thought how they'd been on the river ever since the day they escaped. Just a couple ex-cons turned God-fearing, seafaring men. Everything was a rat at one time, Lefty said. A man, a dog, even the horse himself was a rat, they say. London Jack shook his head disagreeably and began looking to the rolling hills, the grass, and the wild flowers. Yes, even horses wore rats, but now you have the heads of lions. The two kept a steady pace of the day in silence most of the time. But when it was time for some conversation, Lefty led the discourse. London Jack would simply give body language expressions and sighs. Few times he laughed, though he would more oft crack a smile, often rolling his large eyes and twitching his ears. Old lion-headed London Jack went down the tow path. He looked at the river and then his hooves. He'd have to change his hooves for fins, he would. And then he looked at the man. Well, the man was like every other beast, except for his will. Would London Jack trade his ooves for anns? Hard tellin'. They made domino tiles from donkey hooves. Been donkey years since London Jack saw his Trinity. All right, Lefty said. Tunnel. The tunnel was coming, and so London Jack came down to the boat. The twa laid down to walk the boat through the stone roof of the tunnel. 6 legs down the boat through where only a pinpoint of light guided them. London Jack was indeed claustrophobic, but he endured. Trinity was his second owner. Long ago in West Africa, a Fulani prince had come with his family to propose marriage to Trinity when she was but a teenager. He had seen her in the marketplace with her mother as his caravan drove through. He had sent his servants to find where she lived and proceeded to gather gifts for her. There were many gifts of fabric, dates, plantains, and spices, and ultimately a newborn horse, who was there to symbolize how their love would grow. But Trinity's father dismissed the marriage outright. The sad prince insisted that they keep all the gifts to spare him grief and the shame of returning with the gifts. That way, over time, the story would depart of its own accord and not be so suddenly announced. Her father saw the horse and said to Trinity, "The only one with skinnier legs than that horse is you." Trinity called him Nothing Day Happen because he looked so helpless, but she soon changed his name to Laddie for the family's sake. Still, she herself referred to him as Nothing Day Happen. By the time she left home for boarding school, she also had a dog named Tawny and a chicken named Clue, who she kept for eggs and distributed them to the children in her village. They would call her Mama an Egg, and she loved to hear them laugh as they ran. She would call to them, "If you break your egg, don't come crying to me." At this time, she lived in the South, and her family still lived in the North. When she began university, Nothing Day Happen was used to go to surrounding towns, but Trinity walked to church on Sundays. She worshiped hours before she ever stepped into the church. Through prayer and fasting, she woke early at 3 a.m. and prayed in bed. Then she prayed all through getting up and getting ready. Under the stars, she moved to warm her body from the chill. Usually she left at sunrise after feeding Tawny and Clue, and Nothing Day Happen. Trinity loved the red sun in the morning, shining like the most sacred heart of Jesus. Sometimes she stayed in church until evening to see the red sun again as she got a ride home on a motorbike. Her beauty turned heads as she went and returned. London Jack's large eyes flashed with tears thinking about Trinity. She had cared for him when he was young and made him strong. Now he had to work for his living, but he supposed that is the way of most living things. He was thankful to Lefty for getting him out of prison and from getting eaten by the prisoners on Easter Day. Lefty also promised to take care of him when they got to Canada. Was that going to be his land of rest? Wasn't it just farther away from his past? While Trinity was enrolled in high school, she began the first of her professional endeavors as a beauty pageant contestant. She ran in 6 beauty pageants, 5 in Nigeria and 1 in Ghana. She finished runner-up in 5 and Miss Congeniality in 1. She was the true winner since the other women who won the crown were relatives to the sponsors of the pageant. All the while she was performing, she was making lasting contact with many of these businesses that either sponsored or managed the contestants. Each night she wrote detailed notes on all the people she was meeting. During these times, her pets were looked after by neighbors as she went on one of her contests. But on the last one in Ghana, she came back, all her animals were gone. Her neighbors had turned wicked and decided to eat Clue. As he was being taken to a stump, the place of his execution, Tawny ran up and bit the man on the hand. Tawny tried to bite them again as they were taking Clue, and then Clue was able to break free and flew a short distance before running into the bush. Tawny they locked in with a fence pen and were sure to get a gun. He instantly began to dig and got himself out. Tawny began to run towards Nothing Day Happen, who was tied in the barn. But Nothing Day Happen told him he was tied up and just to run away. And if not for a shot from a shotgun that just missed Tawny, he would have figured out a way to free Nothing Day Happen. That night, Nothing Day Happen was taken into town where he was sold to a British man who took him back to London. This man donated him to the local police, but as they had no use for him, they put him out at a prison to plow a few hedgerows. London Jack didn't mind prison in the least. That was the case at first, that is, but things change when you suddenly become an item on the cafeteria's menu. Ever since they got out, London Jack spent his days reading through the newspapers that passed by in the streets and that collected under bridges. Lefty knew he liked the paper and kept him up to date on all things domestic and foreign. So all the while, as he thought about Trinity, he put her into the living day and wondered what she would think about these things. He imagined she must be a queen somewhere, and that Tawny had found her, and that they lived together in the palace. He knew she would go on to do such great things. He thought about the newspapers that blew in the streets. Maybe he'd see her picture on one day. Order and procedure, Queen Trinity read aloud. Tawny, the UK Parliament is planning to control the minds of its citizens. These are the words of Prime Minister Albinus Hogg. It's been repeated. The press is tricking the newspaper reading public into thinking everything is going well. Hogg has his sinister agenda. His latest provision passed. It harkens back to the past. The foggy yesteryears of our forebears that continue to befog the minds of our tomorrows. The Paprika tariffs. All that was done to celebrate what they called Britannia, and established by secret orders during their ungodly moon rituals in sequestered nooks in the moors of York. And the success of the realm was as though cheering for a great failed champion. All the vendors selling spice had had their windows broken in. Pre-cooked meals were sent to all the state-owned schools. Only religious schools could cook for themselves, and even then under suspicion. The country had been nationalized. This man Crow, Tawny, I feel his family history has something to do with it. There is certainly a mineral named Britannium. I saw it in the file. Is it used for mind control? Why would that be? It must be a sedative, but I suppose it enables their other tactics. Those woolly rats. But we got out, by God. And then Good Friday morn, Lefty's voice echoed down the tunnel. I had underestimated how unique a man escaping with a horse would be, but we both took our chances through that sewer. Then we got a boat. This here boat, by George. Painted it up over the years. A nice river boat for the canals. London Jack wept. Can't say just one of us broke the ice to the pole, London Jack, Lefty said. No, it takes two. I like me Peedle Appleyard. Against Augustine's original sin? Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. They're all lawyers of the law now. I too may have a wife and child, said St. Francis. That's good enough for me. Back when we had an empire, a man might have a half dozen sons he didn't know. Nowadays, it's as few as one or two. London Jack smiled. Chapter 2. Albinus Hogg and Cincinnatus Crow. Out of the undergrowth, Prime Minister Hogg's conservative government had come back to win the general election. His party was called the Fourth Right Party. Prime Minister Hogg had used one of his underlings in the conservative government to put forth a bill that Labor had tried to pass earlier. The bill was meant to help bring about renovations to the historical districts of the towns of Britain. Hogg wanted to take the money and rebuild the original market streets, complete with gallows and stocks. The Conservatives were challenged by a Scottish MP of the SNP shortly after they introduced an amendment to the bill to portion out 15 meters of rope to each town receiving gallows. Why would this provision need to be codified? MP Thurston Hurlston Johnson asked. Surplus, Hogg said. Can you really stand there, straight-faced, and dismiss the fears of these people with a word? MP Thurston Hurlston Johnson asked. It costs His Majesty's government more to hold onto this rope than to give it away, Hogg said defiantly. It has helped the ropery, who make up more than 0.02% of our working force. I know it seems small to you, but the conservative government wants to help everyone. Surplus, cried Johnson. It's strategic. It's terrorism. It's portioned fairly, Hogg said. Guy it to your MPs to eat 15 miters each. Albinus Hogg immediately went to work yet again on what was a long-in-use scheme by both sides of the government. It had been found in the early 20th century that there was a mineral chalk-like that was found in a couple coastal regions of York near the moors, as well as a few places in Wales. The deposits in Wales could be significantly higher, but it would mean raising the mountains to nothing. Prime Minister Hogg had thought he could influence the Welsh later in his term to do just that, but now he could rely on the mines in the north. He fortunately had gone to school with a man whose family had been disgraced due to the mining of Britannium. The man's name was Crow, Cincinnatus Crow, and his name was infamous due to his grandfather. Under the auspices of his grandfather, Cornelius Cornwallis Crow, the mine saw their last good days, but in his waning years, early in this century, he had begun silting up the mouth of the river with his mining. The old crow had silted it so bad that it long since made the former town of Corby sat miles inland and consequently without its port. Escarpment after escarpment crumbled from the hollowing out of the hills and the dynamite blasts. By the time of his son, the antiquarian, Sir Colton Crow, the mines were dwindling. He spent the family fortune buying back his titles from the government. He was the father of Cincinnatus Crow, who now was the last crow of the manor, which in the bygone days of ages past, along with Cincinnatus, constantly heard about the family legacy. We date back to Laurentia, Baltica, Avalonia, Origine they call it. The crow name once struck fear into the common man. By the way, the crow flies. He pounded on the table with his fist. Some of the pewter fell over, and Mr. Brunton, the butler, set it upright. That's the way this country used to be, straight to the heart of each matter. They relieved our titles for a time, but I've spent the entire treasury of the town just to get back what they took from us. Isn't that right, Cincinnatus? Most veritable, father, Cincinnatus said. Yes. Through gross negligence to safety and no concern for either animal or human life, the crows were able to expand their mines, and so there was an increase to the dynamiting of the lands. The river became murky with pollution and then seemed to run away, changing its path. The Corby River was once a beautiful estuary, but the mudlands had only muddy fish and oysters and clams that the people couldn't eat on account of the pollution, though try they did. The change of the river swept across the field of life Jarvison and caused considerable damage to several other farms. Jarvison's barn was swept out to the sea. It washed away his milk cow, washed away his sheep, washed away his chicken coop, and finally washed away his corn crib. And so he swore his revenge. He passed this oath of revenge to his 4 sons, Lowell, Marwell, Thomas, and Oscar. The town of Corby was no longer a port. The change in the river had left the town shipyard obsolete, with the rotting carcasses of ships rotting in the once illustrious harbor. From thence these mudlands were called Crow's Bay, which attached their name to failure. Crow Manor sat perched for 1,000 years on that hill, that dark and lowering hill. Ancient stones that sat there since time ever were quarried 1,000 years ago and constructed into this sinister-looking hall. The garden, the lime walk were all dirt and weeds, overgrown, with overgrowth and undergrowth sprawling all over the place. There were no longer vast amounts of servants, just one simple butler, Brunton, and a housekeeper, Mrs. Brunton. Mr. Brunton had been there since he was a young boy. Between the two, they covered all the duties of the manor. We need the mines opened, Hogg said, but the people won't work in them anymore. Crow. We have that covered, Hogg. We are bringing in some workers. I thought your government was against migrant workers, Crow. Ostensibly, yes, Hogg said, but we have to be flexible. Where are they from? Crow asked. Aunt Bjornia, Hogg said. You don't mean? Crow. Precisely, Hogg. Penguins. But they're Stalinists, Crow said. Concessions, said Hogg in the same casual manner he had done when questioned at the Parliament. Crow reticently put the penguins to work in his mine, and due to their number, they were able to work the operation 24 hours a day. They were Stalinists, but that was on account of the region they lived in, Aunt Bjornia, where an old Soviet scientific exploration camp that had about 1,000 1-meter by 1-meter steel etchings of Joseph Stalin on them. And as the penguins huddled around these for warmth, they grew to have the same alleged politics of the man. Soon after they began working, they wore out the old equipment, but Hogg had already ordered larger and better equipment from the National Implements Yard. When the new mining equipment arrived through Corby, the town was abuzz. The townspeople were indolent. None of them wanted to work these mines, but they assumed the penguins were well compensated. The mining, drilling, and dynamiting echoed through town, and the townspeople turned their heads to the hills and muttered, "Aye, what's all this then, eh?" The town quickly was placed under a boil notice. It was lifted after it was shown that boiling the water only exasperated the problems by making the contaminant airborne. Crow wanted nothing to do with the mining. It had been quiet in his time. The townspeople held disdain for him, but it was silent disdain on account of his inactivity. He had pushed for Hogg to give him an hour as the premier poet and to be named poet laureate of the whole country, but it had since gone unfulfilled. He fancied himself the poet laureate and paid the newspapers anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds per poem to put him in. He wrote prophecy onto himself under the influence of Britannium. During the moon fetes he held in his gardens, he would recite his poetry. Incidentally, he was not allowed into the brotherhoods that celebrated these similar ritualistic moon fetes in the moors of nearby York. Crow went down to a place he called the Kuprick Beaches. He had an affinity towards the moon. He reminisced the moons of the past. "Oh, the moon that shone on Euclid," he wrote in one of his more palatable poems. But one had to disagree with the contents in one's stomach to put any weight upon the moons of the past. It was the same moon as today. If the days of the moon were as its years, he would never enter his 30s. Crow called the moon old man, father, father moon, my father. And indeed his father was buried on the moon. Oh, Father Moon, is there a pharaoh's tomb on the moon? And today there are many pharaohs' tombs on the moon. They were taken there a half-century ago by a group of billionaires, and his father had also buried himself in the midst of these men. Crow lived in the poetry he created. Whatever he wrote, he would choose to believe. He, as though it were endearing, would tell Hogg all about his father leaving his lunar crypt to do some mining on the moon. As the months went on and Britannium was being mined, Hogg put up with all the cawing. Hogg's agenda was steamrolling ahead. The people everywhere were eating more Britannium. The food was at enriched levels, with a few places on the map given dangerously high amounts. Magistrates and court officials began to line up to accept Britannium for their districts because they were directly tied to public funding. Britannium was an additive that no food could be left without. It was so deep in the food supply that no diet could avoid it. The hippie communists who ate only cabbage were safe for a while, but they were soon given crates of government tea with Britannium laced in it. Hogg started by making sure anyone on benefits could only buy food with Britannium, but soon all the food had Britannium, and it didn't matter. It affected some people powerfully. Others only took the turn, they called it, after a month of eating the food. But for some people, it didn't seem to affect them. So as the months went by, Hogg's plans in many ways were going better than he expected in most areas, but underwhelming in others. His avid supporters saw every strong move Hogg made as an extension of their fists. They were violent. That was the only politics they had. They gladly punched the earth in the face over and over. King AI was going to give a speech at Parliament, and this coincided with naming a new poet laureate after the late death of John Benson. But it was postponed out of recognition of the greatness of the shadow of the man. Hogg had promised it to Crow in exchange for complete use of the mining, but he asked Crow to forgive him and said next year they would for sure name a new poet laureate. Crow had become uneasy with the penguins in the town. He needed the security. He needed a legacy. He needed to be in league with Tennyson. The penguins were quietly unionizing. Crow was not a man or steel. He was hardly a man at all. He was erratic. The only thing that was a temporaneous calm to him was Britannium, and so he quickly became addicted to it. He put spoonfuls of it into his milk. Then he'd go off to the Cupric beaches and found himself composing another poem about the moon. The glee in his eyes became terrifying.